Let's blow this up.
Look alive, Bomb Squad. We are back and better than ever for another installment of Let's Blow This Up. I'm your host, Jason Sircone, and we are one episode away from the season 2 finale of Let's Blow This Up. And just like we started off, we're closing things out strong. So tonight's episode is going to be a great time, and we are joined by one of the main men in the podcast space. This guy has done it all, and I'm sure you've heard this name. If not, stay tuned because you are going to learn a lot from the one, the only, Mr. Alex Sanfilippo. Alex, thank you for joining me on Let's Blow This Up. What's up, my friend?
Jason, man, it's so great to be here. Really excited about what you're doing, and just honored to be included, man. So I'm excited to have a fun conversation. Anytime you and I talk podcasting, it can get deep. So I'm excited to see where this goes today.
We've proven on past podcasts this can go several layers deep. So now that we've set the bar real high, we've got to let the Bomb Squad really take in some good chatter tonight. But I think we can make it happen.
I agree. I'm ready, man.
And before we kicked it off, I mean, we said there's so much that we could talk about. Let's dive into some of the things that you've been working on. Obviously, for those that are in the Bomb Squad watching and listening to this episode, if you have never heard of PodMatch, it's one of the biggest and strongest. And if you ask me, really the most involved human-centric communities in the podcast space, because I know you and Alicia and your team do so much to bring podcasters together, but it's not driven by greed. It's not driven by money. It's driven by that community. And that's something that has led to a lot of podcasters finding new levels of success. With everything that you've done up to this point, obviously it's continued to evolve and take on a life of its own. We're very close to a brand new year. Recap 2024 for us and let us know what you guys have on the horizon rolling into 2025.
Yeah, man. Thanks for the platform, the opportunity to talk about that. The first thing I'll mention, PodMatch, if you're unfamiliar with it, it's a software that connects podcast guests and hosts for interviews. I always say it works very similar to a dating app, but instead of connecting you for dates, it connects you for interviews on podcasts. So you can message in the platform, you can schedule, you never have to exchange an email if you don't want to. And the whole idea was simplifying, connecting the right guest and host together. There's a lot of people who want to be on podcasts, right? And there's a lot of people looking for guests. Finding the right one can be a challenge. Our job is to really simplify that as much as possible. And yes, that's what the software does. But as Jason said, the community aspect is everything to us. Like that's more important to us than any other element of it. And we find that the best way to know what will serve the podcasting community, both guest and host, is being in it, which sounds crazy. Like I make a face at that because some people are like, why do you have your own podcast? I'm like, so I know what it's like. And yes, I'm very involved in the production process. I did outsource editing, Jason, just so you know. So I'm not actually, and that was sad, man. I actually found it therapeutic, which maybe I'm one of those weirdos, but the team's like, hey, you know how this works. You can still speak at it with integrity, but you've got to let it go. So I let go of that actual element of it. The rest of them I'm still very involved in because I don't want to lose touch with what indie podcasters do. I want to make sure that I know. And that's kind of been the way we've grown the entire company is just, hey, let's keep a pulse on this thing. Let's be involved. Let's be part of the solution and not just be another thing that you can quote unquote pay for and send your money to. And hopefully it works for you. Right. No, we want to be at the front line. So man, thank you for acknowledging that. And it's been a blast. And this year specifically, if I could just mention that, really learned how to hone in exactly what people want. I think that when I started, I kind of guessed and I did get some like feedback and stuff. So I guess I kind of knew what I was doing, getting into how it would help people. But this year I've really figured out how to have the right conversations and really even leverage how we're seeing people use PodMatch, what the community is talking about in general, to make sure that we're heading in a direction that's really helping shape the future of podcasting based off of what people want. And this year I can say with confidence, man, I've got more direction, more clarity. We're seeing more results than we ever have before because we've really got this thing honed in and going in a direction that people want. Every 2 weeks right now, we release an update, and every time people are like, this is like exactly what we needed, what we wanted, right? And so we're just kind of following the evolution of podcasting and just staying at the forefront and being really involved in it from a community standpoint.
And one thing that I think behooves all of us as podcasters, for one, and this may seem very on the nose, but you solved a very obvious problem in podcasting. It's bringing people together. Sometimes guests are looking for those right podcasts to make an appearance on so their message is heard by the right people. And hosts are looking for the right guests to feature so their content will pop, ultimately creating that engaging content that brings more people in and then keeps them in the seats so they will learn more and want to come back for more podcast episodes in the future and start sharing that content with others. But what you guys have done, and I think this is very unique to what you've built. You just shared this statistic the other day as we sit and record this episode today of how much money you've given back to podcasters. And I know in speaking with new podcasters, one of the driving forces, one of the first things they think about, even if conversations with me will slightly alter this thought process, but it's all about monetization. They're thinking money first. What can I do to get money from this? And I get it. I understand that mentality, but there's so much more that you can get from it. But you guys have done something truly special. Share with the Bomb Squad how much you've given back to the podcast community this calendar year.
Yeah, man. Listen, like I get the need for that conversation to like happen. Like where they're like, hey, the money thing. I know that you're kind of at the forefront of like reframing that and positioning it. And you've done a really good job with that. I think it's important. But I get it. From day one, you have costs when you're in when you're in podcasting, right? So the mind is, okay, at the very least, how do I offset this? Bingo. And that's what we've set out to do. So like the number seems big. Like we just hit through we call it our pod value initiative. If you go to any search engine, type in pod value initiative, you'll find it. We just surpassed $500,000 that we've put back into the hands of podcasters, which I'm thrilled about. That is good. The only metric I track, which is funny. People say I'm a terrible founder for this reason. I don't know any metric other than that one. It's on the homepage of our website. So people are like, how's the company doing? I literally go to podmatch.com, scroll down a little bit, and I look at that number. I'm like, good. It's a lot higher than it was last month. And so you're like, you don't look at the rest. I'm like, no, that's my other co-founder's job. It's not healthy for me, the community guy, to get too attached to the numbers. I think that can get dangerous. The only number I want to be attached to is the one that's focused on giving and supporting. And so we don't do it to boost ourselves up. We just want to be part of the solution of saying, can we help independent podcasters offset their production cost? And listen, $500,000 sounds like a big number when you think about the industry at whole. It's not a whole lot yet, but we're going to keep on driving forward with it because I know every little bit helps. And even if we can just put $100 back in the pockets of independent creators every month, like, man, that's huge, right? Like that to me is big. And I know when I got started, my cost was probably 80 some odd dollars. I can remember the tools I was using many years ago. If I was making $100 a month, I think I would have done a lot better, a lot faster, because I wouldn't have been thinking about the money. I would have just been thinking about the content that I was able to produce. So I probably needed to meet you at that point, Jason, but here we are now. So, but anyway, yes, that's our pod value initiative, man. And that the biggest passion I have is helping creators create. I want their voice to get elevated and heard throughout the world because they've got a unique message that they can share, that no one else can share, that serves the world, makes a better place. I really want to help enable that any chance I get.
You just hit the nail on the head because that's the one thing that often will hold people back. I mean, I shouldn't say the one thing. There are a number of things that will make a person not press the start button, but one of them is the cost behind it and thinking about everything they have to invest. And that's sometimes is a misconception that we have to deal with, that you don't need the top of the line equipment, especially when you're getting started. But ultimately, it's those costs that go into putting that content out there. There is a way that you can curtail some of that expense. But again, what you guys have done is offered a way to not only let people bring their message to the forefront, let them experience what it's like to have a podcast that can experience success in the very beginning. And then when it comes down to it, if you're offsetting some of those costs, I think back to the early days myself. I didn't have a ton of expense, but at the same time, if I could have made that no expense, I could have put that money towards a number of different things. And again, it's not $1 million. It's not changing the world type of money, but every little bit helps. And if you can press that start button and discover all of the tangibles and the intangibles that come from successful podcasting, you're going to be in a very good place.
You know, I want to add one thing here for everybody who's listening, watching, checking this out. Even if you feel like you can only do a little bit, don't let that stop you. Making a difference always starts with somebody doing little. I think back to a Helen Keller quote who said, alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much. And I think we need to all remember that. For me, the day we launched that pod value initiative, the very first comment on my post, which I was nervous about, like I didn't even know how to write it. Jason, I just like, okay, here we go. I posted it almost immediately. Somebody said the very first comment was, seriously, that's it? It's not even worth my time. And I was instantly like, oh man.
This was the most recent update, or this was
no? This was the original post I did of it. So years back, and that was the very first one. Like not even worth my time. And so I ended up reaching out to that person. I got every other comment was super positive. So like, but you know, it is that one negative sticks with you. I'm like, why am I doing this? You know, like why right away? So I end up talking to the person. Come to find out, they're like, man, I really need to offset my production costs. Like I just need to be able to make $500 a month, and you're not gonna be able to help me do that. I'm like, no, but it's more. Like after we got into it, I'm like, this is more than anything else you're doing, right? They're like, I'm making $4 a month on ads. I'm like, you're gonna make at least $100 a month doing this. Like, what do you mean it's not enough, right? And so like it re-encouraged me, but I bring that up just to say, even if people start coming in and discouraging you, I usually find that means you are that person doing something that's small, that is very important and going to have this domino effect over time. We didn't reach $500,000 that we've given back overnight. Took us time to do it, right? And so I think that I just want to encourage everyone with that. Like, think about it. Even if it's something small, be willing to be that person who steps out and does that, knowing that it will inspire and encourage others to do something similar.
And I feel that's a mindset that transcends podcasting. It's something that we're dealing with in every facet of society these days. Everybody wants immediate results, and even the smaller things that could compound into the big result that you're looking for, no one seems to have the patience to want to put in the work to do that small activity and then ultimately get the bigger gain. I'm never going to understand that mentality, and I think a lot of it stems from the highlight reels that we see on social media, but I'm thankful that I was at a very young age, work ethic was instilled in me, and I understood that the things that I wanted to achieve in my life, be it physical, emotional, spiritual, financial, it wasn't going to come easy. It was going to come from the effort that I was willing to put into it. And I think if we start looking at podcasting in that respect, we're going to have a lot more people making it beyond the 3 or 4 episode mark, where so many people unfortunately throw in the towel.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point, man.
So let's talk about the future. We're rolling hard into a new year. You guys have done a ton with PodMatch, and I think this would be a fun way to look at where we're headed. But since PodMatch came into existence, and let's even go back beyond that, when you first got into podcasting to where you are today, what type of changes have you seen? What's the biggest evolution that you've been able to say, oh my God, I can't believe we've gotten beyond where this was? So, because again, I mean, there's a number of things that you could point to, but for you personally, what have you seen that's really stood out the most to you in regards to evolution in this industry?
To give a little context, I hit publish my first podcast episode. I don't remember the month, but it was in 2014. And I was using my iPhone. I don't know which generation iPhone it was, whichever one that was back then. I was probably 2 years behind, actually, on whatever that was. Take off 2 years, and that's probably the iPhone I was using. And I was editing straight into, I think it was called voice memos or voice notes at that point.
Yeah,
and I was recording into that, and I loaded it into iMovie on my iPhone, and I would edit it right there on my phone. And then I would email that file to the computer where I would add it to the hosting provider and upload it. That's
wow.
The time has changed. I will say I really liked editing while I was on a walk. I would go on a walk, I'd put in earbuds, and I'd be editing while I was on a walk, which was kind of a fun thing. But not time effective, cost effective, I suppose. But like the tech has changed a lot. I did that because it's all I could figure out. And I just wasn't, and still this day, like I'm maybe not the most tech savvy person, which sounds weird for a software founder. I get it, and podcaster, but I just didn't really understand how to do it all. The tools for editing have evolved, I mean, so much. And it is so much easier to learn. There's tutorials all over the internet on how to do anything that you want to do, that most of them in video format. So you can just watch it real quick and then you know it. There's all kinds of things on that front. The other thing is just the culture of the acceptance of podcasting. When I first got started, people were like, okay, so you have this thing called a podcast. Explain that to me. I think we're mostly beyond that, right? But I remember when I started having people I want to have people on as guests, convincing people the value of being on a podcast was like pulling teeth, Jason. I was like, will you please be on my podcast? I will pay you. I will do anything. And they're like, I'm not going to waste my time, Alex. Right? Like, I will not waste my time to be a guest on a podcast. People that are popular, people that are not popular, everyone was like, are you kidding? Like, why? That's so dumb. No one cares about podcasting, right? Fast forward years, people are like, please, I will give you anything if you will let me be on your podcast, right? Right. And it's not because the show's grown. It's just, it's a different culture now. And so like, those are some of the things that have changed. The weird thing is though, Jason, like one thing that has like kind of going to like where we are today is in 2020, and I get it, that was like the year of the hobbyist, right? Everyone trying something new. There was at one point 700,000 active podcasts. Right now, there are below 400,000 active shows. And so one thing that's weird that we've seen is like, there hasn't been real growth in the amount of active shows that there are. The total number has increased. But man, a lot of those are single episodes that people are literally, this is the whole episode. Test. Is this thing on? I'm starting a podcast. And that's all it is. I'm like, I don't know if you can qualify that as a podcast, right? But that's what a bunch of these are. So people are always like, oh, it must be oversaturated now that everything you just shared, Alex. Reality is the listenership is climbing really fast, but the amount of shows are really not increasing at all and they've gone down over the last multiple years at this point.
Where do you think that stems from? I have my theory on this, and a lot of it for me is people hear podcasts, they think it's this game-changing thing for your business, or even if you just want to dive into it for a hobby. I think that it absolutely can be, but the one thing that everybody's lacking is a strategy. And it's the long-term thought process of, what am I truly bringing into the world? I see those numbers and it just makes me squeamish when I hear 90% of podcasts don't get past 3 episodes. And the immediate thought that came to my mind is, why are you launching your podcast so soon? Why are you bringing this to life before you've recorded? The number I look for is 10 to 15 at a minimum, but you could do more than that. But you set yourself up for more success. And I don't think that conversation is being had enough, because if people were bringing podcasts to the world with that mindset and that mentality, we wouldn't have that statistic. We'd have much more successful launch. We'd have much more successful ongoing, because they'd see tangible data, not just a test balloon. Hey, we're going to put this podcast out there. Like you said, test, 1, 2, 1, 2. Here's our show. Oh, no one showed up to listen to our test. And it's mind blowing to me that I'll go back to what I said a few minutes ago. We live in this world where immediacy is front of mind. We want everything now. But even those people that are sharing those highlight reels have had to put a lot of time and effort into getting to a point where they can share that highlight reel. Where is this stemming from? What is making a person think that launching one podcast episode is going to instantly just change the world? What are your thoughts?
Man, we compare everyone else's year 20 to our day 1. First and foremost, I think that's what it comes down to. We see people will look at you, Jason, be like, I want to do that. They'll try it for a week, and if they don't become Jason, then they're out. 2 things wrong with that. One, they're looking at what you've done over many years of crushing it, being in the game when you didn't feel like it, right? But 2, they're also like, how do I become Jason? It's impossible. Jason is already taken. And a more common name I hear that we've all heard, and I'm going to reference it.
I know where you're going. There it
Joe
is.
Rogan, right? And you're like, how to become the next Joe Rogan? I'm like, you don't. Joe Rogan is taken. Like, become the next your name, right? Which means you can't just become a mirror of somebody else, because nobody wants that. They've already got it. And I'm very passionate about that. I often compare it to football, like American football. Listen, I'm a football fan, but I live in Jacksonville, Florida. I'm a Jaguar fan, which means I'm always bitter, is what that means.
I feel for you, bro. Yeah, I feel for you.
But the thing is, if we look at some of the greats in the NFL, like Jerry Rice is a name everybody seems to know. One of the greatest NFL receivers, if not the greatest of all time.
Sure.
And nobody knew who that guy was for 18 years. Not a clue. Right? Like, he grew up, and eventually, because he stuck with it probably every single day of his life for multiple hours with nobody knowing who he was, eventually he became the greatest of all time. He didn't wake up one day and be like, you know what, Mom, I'm going to move out. I'm going to go move to California. I'm going to join the NFL and give it a shot. No, from the second the kid could walk, his mom was like, catch this ball, right? And the thing is, like, we look at where he is. And he has this famous quote, and this is why I use him as an example, is, today I will do what others won't, so tomorrow I will have what they can't. I'm paraphrasing that a little bit, but the thing is, again, we're like, how do I become famous in podcasting? You don't.
No.
You stick with it for a long time, longer than you think you should. Have a strategy, like Jason said. Have a plan to not give up, to not fail, and have a direction for where you think you want to go, and adjust along the way. And one day you'll probably wake up and be like, oh, I'm actually doing pretty good. Because again, going back to that Jerry Rice example, he didn't wake up one day and be like, okay, I've officially achieved it. I'm the greatest of all time. At some point, just like, you could look back and you're like, oh wait, I'm playing really well now. Like, I'm here with the best of the best. And later on, you can look back and be like, wow, I really was the best. But in the moment, you don't know that that's you, right? Like, you can see it later on once you've achieved it. And I think for all of us, we have to be willing to say, this is a journey. This is a process. This is not a destination that I reach. Goal achieved. Now I'm done, right? No, it's got to be a long-term strategy, a goal, a way for you to serve and add value for a long period of time for you to really make it. I think that we're just, like you said, too narrow-sighted to understand how this type of thing works. And what I just shared is extremely discouraging to most people. I think it should be fun. If you don't even like it, don't do it. Find another medium, please, right? Do something that you actually enjoy, saying, I can stick with that. And maybe it'll go somewhere, but maybe it won't. But either way, I like it, so it's okay. And I think if we could shift that mindset, we would really go a lot further, a lot faster, and do better.
100%. And if someone's discouraged by that, too bad. I think it's something that people need to hear more. There need to be more people speaking real about what this is all about. And to speak to who you referenced before, Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan didn't just wake up and have the greatest podcast or the most listened to podcast in the world. This guy started off doing comedy in front of probably 12 people in a small smoke-filled nightclub and evolved to television and doing MMA and then doing Fear Factor and all these things, and then started the podcast, which, if I recall, was just in his basement with some friends when he first started, and they were just having fun with the medium. But he went on this journey to where his name started to get connected with bigger people, and all of a sudden, look where he's at. But I know I can, from my own story, I can reference someone that I spoke to who literally asked me the question, how can you guarantee me that I'm going to get X amount of downloads? And I can't remember the number that he said to me. And I said, I can't guarantee you that, and I never would. If anybody ever does, you should run like hell as fast as you can from that person, because they're lying to you.
Right.
I'm not telling you anything other than here's how we're going to bring something special based on your message to the world. And as we put that in front of the right people, if it resonates, that's how you'll grow. And if you enjoy the process of doing that, you know you found your space. If you feel like this is a chore and it's an anchor on your week, maybe you should find something else to do. Needless to say, he never started his podcast, and here we are. But I think that having that proper mindset, that's where I start anytime I'm talking to somebody about this, whether it's someone I'm actually working with or even somebody that I just want to see do good in this space that tells me they want to start a podcast. We start with the mindset first. Having a clear understanding of what you want to accomplish and not trying to do it for the wrong reasons is paramount to anyone's success in this space, period.
Man, I think about what you just said there, like having that mindset, and like even somebody wanting the guarantee and ended up not starting. When I shared what I just shared for the first time, it was probably a couple of years ago, somebody emailed me. And again, I was automatically like, what's this going to be about? They were thanking me for giving them the permission to give themselves the permission to just quit podcasting. They said, I don't like it. I don't enjoy it. My mentor said I have to, but you proved that I actually don't have to do this. And I was like, never been my goal to get people to stop podcasting, but that's freeing, right? And another example I'll give is Jordan Harbinger, great podcaster who I really enjoy, very good podcaster. I asked him, interviewed him one time. I was like, man, give me like the top piece of advice for somebody in their first year of podcasting. And without hesitation, he said, keep this a hobby as long as you possibly can. He's like, yes, have direction, have an idea, but love it, enjoy it. He's like, people can feel that, they feed off of that. And he's like, I'm only the podcaster I am today because I enjoyed it for such a long time. And he did admit, he goes, it's a job now, right? Like he has people to keep happy with tens of millions of people listening every quarter or whatever it is, right? He's like, but I do still like remember the days of this was strictly a hobby. And I did it for that reason alone. And that's what propelled him into the business that he has in it today. So anyway, I know we're kind of going in a circle here, but I just think it's so important. Like you said, Jason, like let's get the mindset right before we even get ahead of ourselves. And if you're watching or listening to this and you're like, oh, well, Alex and Jason, too late, already started, just pause. Don't pause your podcast. You pause, step back, take pen and paper, get caught up, right? Get your mindset caught up with the work, and then just get right back into the work, and maybe talk to Jason to help you out a little bit with that part.
Yeah. No, I'll tell you what, man, I don't feel like we're talking in circles, because even as we evolve in this space and new technology makes the job a little bit easier, and there's so many things that we can do different. Like, for example, you're editing while walking on your iPhone with iMovie and voice notes. Did you ever think there would be a time where you could just plug in your video and say, remove these words for me, and then you just press a button and it's done? No, you didn't see that back then. But what we just spoke about the past few minutes are the fundamental truths that regardless of what technology ever enters our space, they're never going to be replaced. Because you can have all the fancy tools and all the bells and all the whistles and everything shiny at your disposal. But if you don't have the right mentality for doing this, none of that stuff's going to matter, because you have to think about the big ideas in your mind and what you're bringing to the world first. Let all those tools serve a great purpose. Let a great microphone make you sound as exceptional as you can possibly sound. But get your mind straight first, my friend, or else there's going to be problems. And more than likely, things are going to unravel before you know it.
Jason, you just gave me a thought here. And Bomb Squad, make sure you catch this. I think the reason we see so many people fail now is because it's so much easier to start. If we go back to 2014 when I started, like me starting a podcast, like it was blood, sweat, and a little bit of tears along the way, right?
Right.
And so I was like, man, so I kind of like had buy-in. Like if we go to the law of buy-in, now it's great that it's simple, but it's so simple that it's just as easy to press start as it is to be like, nah. Because you don't really have much effort in the game. The law of buy-in, man, that just kind of clicked. But I'm like thinking now, I'm like, man, like put yourself on the line, get some accountability in your life, pay for something, like do something where you say, okay, I now I've got something skin in the game. It's not just I took 15 minutes. It wasn't cool. Didn't like it. Right now, granted, if you're just trying something new, a hobbyist, we're always going to have those in every industry. That's fine. But if you're like, I'm serious, then prove that you're serious. And I think the best way to prove that you're serious is pull out your wallet, right? Nothing says I'm serious, like take my credit card right now. It's like, okay, this person means business, right? And I'm not telling you go spend a ton of money you don't have or anything, but like law of buy-in is a real thing, man. And I know when you were sharing that, it just kind of clicks. I think it's important for all of us to hear real fast.
On an earlier episode of this season, I was speaking with Tracy DeForge, and we were talking a lot about that mentality of putting something into it. And a lot of times, the first thing that people are thinking about, obviously, like I said before, monetization. They want to go into how we monetize. And a lot of that also comes down to investment. Where do I invest the dollars that I have, even if it's a smaller amount of money on the front end? And typically the first thought is I've got to get the best microphone I possibly can. I think, and this is not a self-plug whatsoever, but I wish I would have had this type of thing back when I started podcasting in 2015, because it would have saved me from making a lot of mistakes. I wish I could have given $500 to a strategist that just would have said, listen, here's what you need to be thinking about. This is what works. This is what doesn't. Tell me what you want to accomplish. And having that type of conversation to where I know I'm launching my show with a strong foundation versus just throwing the spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks, that's going to make for a much better beginning to this, which may capture my buy-in a little bit more. Now, I was a freak in this when I first started. I had done radio in the past, so the first episode I did, even though it wasn't good, I knew I had found my calling. I'm like, I got to do this more. I'm in. But for most people, they work themselves up into such a lather, for lack of a better word here. I've never used that term before. I don't know where that even came from, but nevertheless, I feel like I'm on Murder, She Wrote now. Right? I just pulled all these. But nevertheless, people get themselves so worked up in their mind about what this is going to be that sometimes their first effort really doesn't come off well because they're just so concerned with how they're going to sound and how they're going to carry themselves. On the flip side of that, I've worked with people that came to the microphone so natural and so relaxed. And when I got them into that mindset of you're just having a conversation, you do this every day. Think about it on that level and you're going to be fine. And they were. But I think that can cause some people to really go off the rails, and ultimately everything goes out the window when they're thinking on that level. Just my thoughts.
It's a good thought, man. And for me, if I could go back, listen, when we did that, there was not really, back in our day, is what we're sharing here. Sorry.
Oh, man, we're yelling at the clouds here any minute now.
Right? Everyone who's checking this out, like, how old are these guys? In podcasting years, we're very, very
we had the dog years that kicked in, yes.
We're your grandparents in podcasting years, but there really wasn't options for coaches. And my mentality has grown a lot today when people ask, like, how do you decide to do a new product, new service, or add something new? The first thing I look to do is there an expert that's a coach in this space, and can I pay them a little bit of money to tell me what I don't know? Mm-hmm. And the thing is, people are always like, oh man, but like, that's nice because you have money. I don't have money in that vertical yet, but I'm willing to spend it because I know I will spend more if I don't invest in myself. And I want to upfront invest myself. And sometimes I've done this, and the whole idea, we pulled back on the idea. We decided this is the wrong lane, wrong way to go. And from a software perspective, you're like, oh, well, then you wasted that $500. No. If I was to develop it in that direction without talking to that person, we would have wasted tens of thousands of dollars going down the wrong path. I'd rather spend $500 up front in an hour-long conversation to go back to the team and say, we're not doing this. It's a wrong direction. So to your point, I think the best investment, better than a microphone, is talk to someone who knows the way, who has gone the way, and can help show you the way as well. And to me, nothing is more valuable than that.
Knowledge is power, as they say. As long as we're talking about old school things and going backwards, that's a saying from the 80s and all the old what were those, the old PSAs on the after school specials. But
you're not helping us today, Jason.
I'm really not.
Come on now.
I'm really not. I'm going to have to dye the little bit of gray that I got coming in when this is over just to feel better about myself. But nevertheless, again, going back to what I said before, we're talking about these old school quote unquote principles that they age, but they don't go away, because if we're not thinking about those things first, all the new technology and all the new approaches in the world can come into our path and into our radar, but we still have to have that core fundamental foundation in place if we want to succeed in this platform.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more, man. I think that's just, if you take one thing away from what we've shared today, like, let it be this: find a way to invest in yourself and the future of who you are as a creator. And I think you're going to go so much further.
Yep. No, I couldn't agree with that more. So getting onto that track of where we're going with podcasting, clearly AI has entered the chat. We know that's here. We know it's playing a role in helping people evolve and get better at podcasting, and maybe not even get better at podcasting, but at least simplifying the process of creation, which is great. I use AI to create a lot of things with my podcast, and I feel where we're at, we've just started scratching the surface. So where we go into the new year and all of these new shiny objects that are going to be put in front of us, how do we not get distracted by all of them? And where do you feel podcasters should be putting a ton of their attention so they can continue to embrace the culture of podcasting? Like you said, that buy-in part, make sure you want to make sure you're in this. You're in it for the right reasons. You're enjoying the journey, not just trying to reach a destination. But what do they need to really put their focus on if they want to get the most out of the podcast platform as we continue to roll forward?
First and foremost, you got to keep the main thing. And the main thing for me is different than for you. Like the objective, the direction, the path that you take is going to be different for each of us. And you just mentioned it, shiny objects. A new AI tool, not even just AI, a new tool for podcaster comes out every single day. I mean, to keep up with it is crazy. Yeah. I know some people, they try all of them. Now, a small caveat here. I know a few people, they try all of them, but their podcast is about trying new podcasting tools. Very meta. I know that is their job. But the rest of us, for me, the way I look at it is I built like a pain list. So I have a running list of things that, like, hey, if there's ever a solution for these 5 things, try it, because we need something for this. But if it's not on that list, I'm not like, ooh, new like AI imaging tool, let me go try that out. And yes, the temptation is there because it sounds fun. But the reality is, I'm like, I know that takes me off my path, right? It's like, imagine a physical journey. You're walking over mountains and hills and stuff like that, and you see something like, oh, down the hill right there, that looks like a cool flower, I'm going to go down there. Like, you don't do that when you're like, hey, I've got 30 miles to go, right? You're not like, oh, let me go down here. And we do that as creators. We're like, ooh, something new. If it's not solving a pain point that you say you have to get further down the road, then don't stop to pick it up. Now, granted, again, if we're on that 30-mile journey and you see a nicer pair of shoes than what you're wearing that are real hiking shoes when you're wearing like running shoes, switch them out, right? So that's kind of the example there. But I think we need to be careful. AI has enabled us to do everything by ourselves, which is a gift, but more so I call it a curse. Because we can do everything, we feel like we have to do everything. Let's go back to 2014, 2015, when me and Jason were getting into this space. We knew I can produce a podcast and maybe do one social post, and that's all I can do, because the amount of time it's going to take, that's all I can do. Now, and back then we look at people and like, man, they're posting it everywhere, blog posts, everything, right? They have a team of 20 or 30 people doing that. Now, one creator can do all of that. So the temptation to do all of that is really high. But the reality is, the best creators are the ones that have the discipline to say, I don't need to do everything. I need to do a few things really deep and really well to serve who I know I'm serving, to go along the way on my path that I'm supposed to go on. And so I think that the amount of tools we have, although enabling, although helping, can be the very thing that restricts us from ever getting the traction we want, because we have our hands in too many different things. I've heard some professionals say it. You're better off being on 1 or 2 social platforms and diving really deep into them than being on all of them. And some people are like, oh, no, man, you got to be everywhere. You're missing business. You might be missing some business, but you're getting more somewhere else because you're actually diving into it. And so I think, again, shiny objects, having a direction, having a focus, to me, is going to become more and more key. And I know you want to maybe talk about some of the tools and stuff, and I don't know if it makes sense to get that practical or anything like that. So I'll follow your lead on it. But I did want to at least kind of give that overall perspective of what really matters for us.
what is it? Mile wide, inch deep versus inch deep, mile wide. Did I say that wrong? But
No, I think that's right. Yeah, that's right.
But that's really what it comes down to, is if it's all just the surface level stuff and you're only giving the surface level answers and the surface level type of inspiration or intrigue or whatever you're trying to do with your content, then that's noticeable. And that's very easy for a person to continue to scroll by. And if their algorithm's trying to serve it to them in more than one, because that can happen sometimes, they're gone. And that's just going to trigger the algorithm in a negative way. So I think what it really comes down to is being very rooted in your message. And if you're going to do a podcast, do videos, do social media, blogs, you name it, you could just run down the list of content. You have to be very clear and very concise on what you're talking about these days. It's a lot harder these days to not be as focused as it was in the past. And a lot of it comes down to the fact that we do have so many things making noise in our lives on a daily basis. We are just getting fired at by the fire hose, content after content after content, nonstop. And our little minds are just not built to absorb everything. We're going to get more and more intentional as these devices continue to get more intuitive. That's my thought. I think we've already started to see this to some degree, but you have to have your podcast and all of your content set up so when the person that is looking for exactly what you have to say finds it, you're making an impact. Because if someone goes to that trouble of searching and finding you and you're not giving them substance, they're gone. And it's going to be harder and harder to retain and grow and ultimately achieve the goals that you have in front of you. I feel the exact same way as you, Alex, and I've heard that same message about social media. Got to be everywhere. Got to be on every platform. Got to have a presence. If you're a one-person show, you do not have that kind of bandwidth. It is physically impossible for you to be engaged. You could post on these platforms every day. You'll probably spend the better part of your day doing so, but you won't be able to engage with people, and that's where the magic happens. So you have to think about the one platform where your core audience is hanging out and having fun, so you can have fun with them. And if everybody's everywhere, as everyone says, they're going to find you where you're making the most impact. And that's how you're going to make a difference in this new digital landscape that we are all looking at and waiting to see what happens next then.
Yeah, I've got three thoughts here to kind of like to talk about this a little bit more even. First off, and you kind of hinted at this, but can they find your content? Can they find you? Mm-hmm. Positioning has become so important. You can play the lottery of like hoping someone scrolls past you and you end up somehow in the algorithm in the feed, right? But people are looking for what they're looking for these days, which sounds crazy, right? People are going to search engines, they're going to social media, they're going to podcast players and typing in exactly what they're looking for. Yep. That's actually how I consume podcasts now. I used to subscribe to a ton of shows. Now I subscribe to specific episodes on what I want to learn. And I don't know why. I like to find 10 episodes on the same topic. Sometimes they all have the same title, and I want to listen to all those to really learn it. Are you positioning your content in a way that people can find it by doing that? Example, my podcast is not called Alex 2.0 because if I was to poll everyone here in the Bomb Squad, what do you think Alex 2.0 is about? No one's going to get the answer right.
Right.
And if I name my podcast Season 3, Episode 4, A Conversation with Jason, you don't know who Jason is because I just said only Jason, right? And you don't know what we're actually covering. So Alex 2.0, A Conversation with Jason means nothing. Mm-hmm. Now, if I said, which my show is called Podcasting Made Simple, A Conversation with, I wouldn't even say that. I would say how to develop a proper strategy for your podcast with Jason. Yeah. Now you're like, Podcasting Made Simple. I'm trying to make it simple. Ooh, strategy with this guy named Jason. Who is he, right? You're going to check that one out. But a lot of us, we don't think that way. So we don't position our content to be naturally and organically discovered. That's a huge miss if we're not doing that. So I encourage you, go back. At any point, you can rename episodes. And within 20, 40, or 48 hours, everything gets renamed on all the platforms, right? Mm-hmm. So can they find it? Is number one. Number two is if it's important, we repeat it. I think we've all had an episode that we're like, that's my best performing episode. Here's my question to people when they tell me that. I'm like, have you ever gone back and recovered that same topic? Well, no, I covered it 3 years ago. I'm like, well, your listeners 3 years ago are not the same people today. And if they are, there's more of them. They'd probably like to hear a fresh perspective on that same thing. If it's important, we repeat it. All organizations talk about that. I came from big corporate and did 15 years. In every meeting, I shared the same few things every time because it's important. So we repeat it, right? So make sure that you're thinking about like, oh, this is my most popular few topics. I'm going to go back to those every quarter because people show up for them, right? It's what brings people to what I do. And the last thing here is to make it so good, people can't not share it. Here's an example. I grew up with the TV show The Office. Love The Office.
Absolutely. Love The Office.
Right? There is no episode where at the end of it, Michael Scott comes on and goes, hey, if you enjoyed this episode of The Office, can you share it with a friend? Because the creators know this is so good. We don't have to say a word. This is going to get shared. Can you create content so good that people say, who do I know? This has to go to Jason has to hear this, right? Like you want it to be that good. And that takes time, right? This is a journey. We're learning as we go. But again, can you make it so people can naturally find it? Can you repeat the important stuff? And can you make it so good that people can't not share it?
And I think that speaks to a very strong point that sometimes will throw people off as well. You cannot manufacture virility. You can't produce something that you're saying, I'm producing this to go viral. Look at Haley Welch. She wasn't trying to become this viral sensation. She was just drunk on Broadway and screwing around on camera, and look what that's become, whether you like what she's doing or not. I happen to think she's done the right thing with her fame by using it to raise money to give back to dog shelters, and she's done some good things. It's refreshing. But the point is, if you're trying to manufacture for something and manufacture something that you put out there, and you say, okay, this is the one, this is going viral. No, this is not how this works. And again, that goes back to that substance of continuing to produce the right content in a way that it can be discovered by the right people. And then when they do discover it, they can actually absorb it and get something from it. It takes them through this journey of, this is what I want. I found it. Is this person going to deliver? Yep, they delivered. Now I got to make sure other people see this too. I take this upon myself to help this person get more exposure. I think of just the small little text threads that I have with some of my friends and some of the content that we come across that we'll share between 3 or 4 of us. It's within our circle, but whoever sent that content felt so moved by what they saw, whether it was funny, whether it was invoking emotion, whatever. Maybe it was informative. God forbid we do something that could actually educate us, right? But we took the time to share that even with our circle. Maybe they took that content and shared it outside of that circle with more people. Thinking about the overall substance and the overall impact that your message can have is going to do so much more for you than just trying to shotgun out a bunch of content without much thought or much emotion behind it.
So good, man. Mic drop moment. Actually, mic explosion moment to stay on brand. Good job, man.
Like I said, we're going to finish off this season strong. So, man, I'm setting the bar high for next week's finale too. But nevertheless, let's talk about something that you had brought up. It's funny because we think of I love podcasting for what you and I are doing right now in this moment, getting an opportunity to reconnect. We haven't really had a chance to talk since we were together in Charlotte back in June. So a few months have gone by, but we get this opportunity to connect and share ideas and thoughts and have some fun that ultimately leads to content that others can consume and hopefully feel some type of connection to as well. As we sit and record this week, you shared something that is starting to become more and more of a thing. AI generated podcasts with hosts that are AI. Wow. I mean, that's where we are. Like I said, AI has officially entered the chat, but man, that removal of the human connection that makes podcasting so special blows my mind. And I know that you polled a lot of the people in your circle of, what do you think about this? Do you feel this will become a thing? And many people have very concrete thoughts on where they feel this is going. So share what your community has said about this. And do you feel it's going to become a more prevalent thing in the podcast space to have AI bots hosting shows?
Man, as you're saying this, I'm looking just at one of the platforms to see how many people have come back on. This one has 111 people, and they're primarily people who are like, don't like it. But I address it to podcast guests. So we're just hashing this out, man. So I'm just going to kind of like just full transparency. We just for the first time found on PodMatch a podcast that is doing interviews, but there is not a human doing the interview. It is an AI, and it's smart enough to it can't handle messages because the way we built PodMatch, like someone's physically doing that part of it, but it's doing the green room session and the full interview and after recording. It's handling all of that. It's asking the questions. It's doing it completely on its own. There's not a human that's in the room with it. And it took me a while to figure it out. Somebody kind of tipped us off and like, hey, this sounds weird. They kind of emailed in like, this sounds weird. Maybe I'm being crazy, but I have a feeling I wasn't talking to a person. And we looked, and they're new to the platform. They've had a few people they've interviewed, but they had good reviews from like the first 3 people. Granted, they were all newer podcast guests, but I was like, I don't feel okay about that. Like at the very least, if that's happening, it needs to be fully disclosed.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
It needs to be known that like, hey, all right. So like, I don't know if you all know this, but Jason, I'm talking to right now, that's Jason's AI. It's not actually Jason here with me today. I'm just kidding.
I'm real good at masking it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. I'm just kidding. But the reality is if that were the case, and it's an audio only podcast, so they're never on screen. They're using like one of the recording softwares that only has like just the audio section. So you're not seeing them, which makes it easier to kind of make it fake. But the podcast is done okay. But again, I'm like, man, like I don't know how I feel about it yet.
Yeah.
At the very least, all I can say is like at the very least, that type of thing needs to be disclosed. And how long until we have podcast guests that start? PodMatch is kind of protected, so I'm not even going to use it as an example because it's fully paywalled. But like, what's going to stop a bot from DMing you, inviting you on their podcast, or saying I want to be on your podcast? And because it knows everything about you, because it scrapes your whole profile, has a really good pitch, and then it shows up on your podcast, and it's not even a human, right? Like,
right.
I don't know, man. Is that our future? Like, what are your thoughts, dude?
Well, it blows my mind that this is even a thing. I mean, I often nerd out about the fact that we can, when I go live, I can go live to the world from my little home studio, and that's something that's actually a real thing. So here we are. I guess I got to get it beyond that because it's now pretty commonplace. But I go back to the episode I did with Nick Nelbach here on season 2, and he's doing an AI generated podcast, but he is fully disclosing that this is an AI host. And it's a quick 3 to 5 minute episode where it gives you some news, a lot of it AI tech related. But if that's what you're into, you can listen to that episode on or that podcast on a daily basis, and you can get the information that you seek. And going in that it's an AI host. It's not something that's a head fake where you have to at the end scratch your head and say, was I just talking to a real human? Because I think that's going to be, again, something that transcends podcasting in our world as AI becomes more intuitive and there's just more things that it can do. We're going to have these types of conversations on multiple levels, and we're going to have to find some common ways to make things work, or else it's going to be a world of being faked out by AI, and that's not what we want.
So, man, sorry, I mean, I almost cut you off there. It's like that's showing. I'm still a rookie, guys. I'm still just a kid in podcasting.
I kept going because I'm an AI bot and I don't recognize interruptions.
So, listen, I don't mind that. Like, I can think back to before audiobooks were really heavily used. What I would do is I'd use the I forget what it's called, but basically, if like accessibility on an iPhone, I could have it read a book for me even before like. That's more or less the same type of thing. Like I didn't mind. I wanted to be on a run while I was listening to a book before that was an option. So I'd let the screen reader handle it for me. And you could do that, right? You could load up a book and you could handle it that way. I don't consider it much different than that. Like if you have a news website and you have an AI that's reading your podcast, disclosed, sure. It really, like, I don't even know if it matters. Where I have a problem is when an AI is talking to a human, whether that be the host or the guest, when they're having a conversation and that's not known by the other party, nor is it known by the people who are going to be listening, consuming it. I think that's where there has to be something there. And I actually want to dive into this show specifically. We're going to handle it on PodMatch ourselves. And again, because the nature of how we've built our software, like we don't really have like a real threat, but I want to be ahead of it in the industry to make sure that I'm telling you about this. I want to see if I can still feel the connection between this AI in person, or if I feel like it's stagnant. Because you and I right now, there's synergy, and people that are listening and watching, they can feel and hear that. Like that there's something there. It's that human connection that we are just hardwired with.
Right.
Is that being manufactured through AI, or is there a void that you can almost sense and feel? That's my homework, is to go do that and just see, do I feel anything with this, or can I tell there's something manufactured happening here?
I think another question to ask too is, what is the benefit of not disclosing that information? If you're not going to have that type of interaction and that's the way you want to create content, okay, that's your prerogative, but why would you not disclose that this is how you're doing it? I think it's becoming more and more of a the technology itself is becoming more and more accepted. So if you're not willing to disclose and you do go into it with that head fake mindset, maybe you're not coming forth and saying that, but you're just going into it, not letting the person know they're not talking to a real human. That to me, it plants seeds of fake out, and you don't want people to know. And that's and when I hear that, I'm like, well, what do you have to gain from that? And I have no answer to that question. It's more rhetorical than anything, but that's the part to me that would just make me say, well, wait a minute. If I don't have any real gain from, or I have nothing to gain from this, why wouldn't I say, yeah, my show is hosted by AI, or if you're listening to this, this is what you're going to experience. That way I know going in, all right, maybe I'll want to pay attention to this. For me, I'd be interested to listen just to see what I'm going to experience, because this is all new to each and every one of us.
You know, to take that a step further, like, why do that podcast? Like, why even create it? Like, what now? Okay, if it's an AI tool that can do that, I get why you'd have a podcast about it. You would want to be branded then, right? Or the other application I can see being really good is if I'm a new guest, and this is probably like in real time, this should be a product where it will let you come in as a guest and be interviewed by an AI that will critique you along the way. Right? Like I could see that being a really good application to prepare you for like, hey, here's how you can show up. I still don't necessarily love it, but I could see that being a real product. But if you're just like not disclosing it, not talking about it, like why are you what is the purpose of this? Like for real, what is the point for you doing that? And like that's my question, because at the end of the day, there's somebody pulling a lever in the background. I want to talk to that person and say, what's the goal here? What's the purpose? Like, is there a strategy, or are you just like enjoying tricking people? Is that your mind? I don't know. Like, I really don't know the answer here.
No, and that's the thing. There may not be one yet.
Right.
I think to play devil's advocate, if I'm that person, maybe I don't feel like I have the right voice for a podcast, or I don't have the right face to be on video, but this is my way to create content. And again, if that's the thought, just tell the world. Don't hide that. I think it makes you look worse if you're hiding it, because if it ends up getting exposed, it might make people look at you a little bit differently, and they don't feel you're as credible as a resource as you could be. And maybe your content is coming off in a good way, but because you weren't fully transparent with what you were putting out there, people look at you differently. I don't know. That's, again, I'm just kind of freewheeling this off the top of my head, but that's unfortunately something we're probably going to be having more and more conversations about as we go forward and new AI technologies enters into the game.
So the nice thing, that the takeaway here, because I don't think there's an answer, like you said, there's just nothing yet. And I think at the end of the day, we have to play to our own convictions and our own morals, right? The benefit here is just like when AI first coming on board, I noticed that almost all of my blog posts that I was writing, not using AI, and I'm not against it, but I was actually writing because I do enjoy writing, were ranking so high, so fast on search engines. And at first I was like, what is this? And I realized it's because I was one of the people that was left that was actually writing something, right? And I'll be real, I'm not like, I like to write, but I'm not always the best. There's spelling errors, there's typos, all that's there, but was ranking higher. And it's because all these search engines, they have AIs that can tell if something's AI, and it kind of pulls it down and puts human stuff up. I just think that all this stuff should not scare us. It just tells us if we can really play into our own humanity, flaws and all, we can stand out more than we ever have been able to, because it's less work to do it any other way. But if we're willing to put in the work when no one else is, it gets noticed, it gets recognized. So let your humanity and flaws shine, because I think at some point, that's what people are going to gravitate toward more than any of this perfection or anything else that's very fabricated.
It's funny you bring that up, because I've had some conversations with my daughter lately about focusing on communication skills. And this goes right back to what we were saying before, those fundamental skills. They're never going to leave this, no matter what shiny objects present themselves to us. But I told her, you look around and kids are on their phone all the time, and they're constantly typing, and they're constantly behind a keyboard. And that's where a lot of them are headed. And you hear these scary stories about how no one can have a tough conversation. And you see the kids that have had iPads in their grasp since they were babies, and how they're growing up. And it's just, it's frightening. But I told her, in a world where that's happening around you, you are going to stand out if you focus on those strong verbal communication skills, those interpersonal communication skills. People that are so accustomed to using a keyboard to answer questions and communicate, they're going to look at you a little differently. But what you do in regards to having conversations, bringing something good to the world, it's going to stand out in droves because you have taken the time to focus on actually talking and being a real human. That, and the fact that I even had to have that conversation tells me where we are. But I think it's an important message that more and more people need to grab a hold of.
Yeah, there's an opportunity to lead. And I think that leadership is influence. And I believe that we'll have a lot more influence if we're the ones willing to have the real conversations, to step out, to do something different, go against the grain a little bit. And as creators, the best creator is always the one that pushes the envelope somehow. I don't mean they're like say crazy things, right? They're just willing to do something that other people aren't willing to do. And at some point, it's to pull back on some of the tools, find the tool set you need, and don't go into all the things. Just say, this is what I do. And at some point, again, you'll step up in your leadership and your influence will grow.
No question about it. Alex, as expected, full hour of just tremendous talk. And I know we could probably keep it going another hour if we wanted to. So season 3, we'll have to talk about bringing you back on the show. But bring us home strong, my friend. Obviously, keeping the main thing is something that everybody needs to be focused on. And I know that you have relayed that in many ways through our conversation tonight. But send the Bomb Squad home with one powerful thought about how they can leverage podcasting to take their brand to the next level in the new year and beyond.
Stay true to your niche, your convictions, what it is that you want to do in podcasting, and then focus on it. And for me, I like to look at focus as an acronym. Follow one course until successful. Follow one course until successful. I'm telling you, if you can say, this is my lane, this is my vertical, this is what I stand for, I'm convicted by it, you stay in that lane longer than other people, eventually you get noticed and you do well. And that would be my encouragement to anyone who's checking this out.
I don't think we've ever had a mic drop on an acronym before, but we're breaking new ground this evening. That's very well said, my friend. Thank you for bringing that to us. If the Bomb Squad wants more, how do they get to know you? How do they connect and learn more about PodMatch? Where do they come for more value?
Yeah, for sure, man. Everything I do is at podmatch.com/free. On that page, you'll just find a way you can get 5 quick things you can do that will help you level up as a podcast guest, host, aspiring host, just to kind of help you along the way. I don't want an email address or anything like that. And again, that's podmatch.com/free.
Excellent. Well, I will put that link in the show notes to make life easier. And Alex, once again, my friend, thank you very much for taking the time to be here on Let's Blow This Up.
Thanks, Jason. I appreciate you, man.
All right, Bomb Squad, this was the second to last episode of season 2. We'll be back next week with the grand finale, and I'll be once again joined by a guest that helped me kick off season 2. He was on the opening panel. Mr. Jay Franzi will be joining me to talk about making major changes in your podcast, because as we round out season 2 and go on a brief hiatus before bringing back season 3 of Let's Blow This Up, you guessed it, I got some major changes that are coming your way. So we're going to lay all those out next week. You're invited to check them out every Wednesday, except for when we're off, obviously. 7:00 p.m. on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. The Bombtrack media pages is where this show goes live, and the podcast goes out every Friday. Glad you're here in the Bomb Squad to check that out. Make sure you're following. Make sure you're subscribed. And until our paths cross again, my name is Jason Sircone. This has been Let's Blow This Up. Until next time, stay explosive.